"You're done here, Miss Whitmore." Henry Wallace dropped the clinic keys onto the floor at her feet, like she was a dog. He was done feeding. "Pick up your bag and don't come back." Clara didn't bend to pick up those keys. She stood straight, looked him in the eye, and said the only thing left, she had her dignity. She walked out. No goodbye. No tears. One suitcase. 50 miles of open country ahead of her, and not a single soul watching her go. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Montana Territory, 1884. The road out of Dust Valley was not much of a road at all. It was a wound cut through dry earth, cracked down the middle, like something inside it had given up years ago. Wagon ruts ran deep on either side, filled overnight with the kind of cold that settled into your bones before you even realized you were shivering. The sun had barely cleared the ridge when Clara Whitmore stepped onto that road, her old leather suitcase gripped in her right hand, her jaw set so tight her teeth ached. She did not look back, not at the clinic she had spent 2 years building from almost nothing. Not at the single-room boarding house where she had slept on a mattress so thin she could feel the wooden slats beneath it. Not at the church steeple, the general store, the faces she had touched with her hands when they were burning with fever and terrified and had nobody else to call. She did not look back because she already knew what was there. Nothing that wanted her. Clara Whitmore had arrived in Dust Valley 2 years earlier with a medicine bag, a certificate from the Eastern School of Nursing, and a belief, stubborn and sincere, that a frontier town needed someone who understood the human body as well as they understood cattle and crops. She was not wrong about what the town needed. She was only wrong about whether the town would admit it. The man who had run the clinic before her, a doctor named Aldridge, had been competent enough but old and slow toward the end. He died quietly one winter night, and the town was left without any medical care. Clara had already been working beside him for months, doing more of the actual work than anyone acknowledged. When Aldridge passed, she simply kept showing up. She pulled a miner's crushed hand back from the edge of infection. She sat with a mother for 14 hours during a birth that should have killed them both, and didn't. She stretched a supply of laudanum across 3 months when the shipment from the east was delayed, rationing it carefully so that every patient who needed it got something and nobody was left in agony. The town used her. And for a long time Clara told herself that was enough, that being needed was close enough to being valued, that doing good work would eventually speak louder than any rumor or resentment. She was wrong about that too. Henry Wallace had come to Dust Valley the previous spring, arriving in a private coach with 2 hired men riding alongside him, and a manner that made it clear he expected the town to rearrange itself around his presence. He was a merchant, a supplier, a man who understood that the real money in a frontier territory was not in mining or ranching, but in controlling what miners and ranchers needed to survive. He bought the general store within a week. He bought the livery stable the week after. By midsummer, he had a controlling interest in the grain mill, the feed warehouse, and most critically the medical supply route that served the clinic. Then he came to Clara. He sat across from her in the small room she used as an examination space, his hat in his lap, his smile practiced and smooth. "I've been thinking about the clinic's future," he said. "The clinic is functioning," Clara replied. "It's functioning on goodwill and prayers," Wallace said. "I can make it function on money, real money. I can expand this space, bring in better supplies, maybe even get you a proper doctor to work alongside. What would you want in return?" Wallace leaned forward slightly. "Just a small arrangement. My warehouse handles some goods that need to be stored quietly. Medical supply crates are not typically searched. The clinic's storage room is private and secure." Clara stared at him. "You want to use this clinic to hide contraband?" "I want to use this clinic's resources intelligently." "The answer is no." Wallace's smile didn't change. Not at first. He let a long moment pass the way a man lets a door swing shut before he decides to break it down. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "I'd think very carefully about that answer." "I have," Clara said. "The answer is no." He stood, placed his hat on his head with both hands, looked at her with something that was not quite contempt and not quite pity, something worse than both. "You'll regret this," he said. "Then I'll regret it," she said. He left, and Clara made the mistake of thinking that was the end of it. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The rumor started small. A whisper at the general store that Clara had mishandled a prescription and nearly poisoned a child. The child in question had never been ill. Nobody went back to check. A comment at the church social that her methods were unorthodox and wasn't unorthodox, just a polite word for reckless. A letter supposedly from a medical board that Wallace somehow produced suggesting Clara's nursing certificate was irregular. She demanded to see the original. The letter disappeared before she could examine it closely enough. One by one, the faces in Dust Valley changed when they looked at her. The miner whose hand she saved stopped greeting her on the street. The mother from the 14-hour birth crossed to the other side of the road when she saw Clara coming. The men on the town council called a meeting and informed Clara with the particular cruelty of people who believe they are being reasonable that the clinic would be placed under new management while her qualifications were reviewed. Wallace sat in the back of that meeting and said nothing. He didn't need to. He had already said everything that mattered to everyone who mattered. Clara had sat alone in the clinic that last night working by lamplight, writing out careful notes on every patient she had treated, every supply she had ordered, every decision she had made, and why. Not because anyone asked her to. Not because it would change anything. But because she needed to know she could look at the record of her own work and find it honest. When she finished, she folded the notes into an envelope and left them on the desk for whoever came next. Then she packed her suitcase. She was already walking out the door when Wallace arrived in the morning. He had clearly expected a different scene, perhaps a confrontation, perhaps tears, perhaps some final plea he could dismiss. Instead, he found a woman who had already finished grieving something he thought she was just beginning to lose. He dropped the clinic keys onto the floor at her feet. Clara didn't bend for them. "You'll regret leaving," Wallace said. "I already told you," she replied, "that I was prepared to regret things." She walked out into the cold morning and turned south on the road that led away from everything she had built, and she walked without looking back. 3 miles down the road, the anger started to wear thin. Not the determination. The determination held. But the anger, the hot, clean, sustaining anger that had carried her out of that building and down that road, began to cool in the morning air, and underneath it was something she didn't want to examine too closely. Not grief exactly. More like the particular exhaustion of a person who has fought a battle they fought correctly and lost anyway. She switched the suitcase to her left hand. Her right shoulder ached. The road ahead disappeared into low hills, and beyond those hills were more hills. And somewhere beyond all of that was the next settlement, Harlan's Creek, 40-something miles southeast. She had enough money for a room for a few nights, and perhaps a week of meals if she was careful. After that, she had no plan. She was 31 years old, trained and experienced and capable of more than any 2 doctors she had worked alongside, and she had no plan. She switched the suitcase back to her right hand and kept walking. She heard the hoofbeats about 20 minutes later. 1 horse. Moving at a steady pace behind her, then slowing. Clara did not turn around. She had learned something in 2 years on the frontier, that a woman alone on an open road attracted a particular kind of attention, and that turning around was often interpreted as an invitation. Better to keep moving. Better to make clear without a word that she was not a woman who waited. The horse came alongside her and slowed to match her pace. She still didn't look. "Ma'am?" The voice was low, not the voice of a man accustomed to raising it. Clara stopped walking. She kept her face forward for one more moment, a small private act of resistance, and then turned. The man on the horse was perhaps 35, lean in the way of men who worked outdoors and worked hard with the kind of face that had been weathered by sun and wind into something that looked older than it probably was. He wore a dark coat and a hat pushed back slightly, and he sat his horse with the unconscious ease of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than out of it. She knew who he was. Dust Valley was small enough that everyone knew who William Carter was, even people William Carter had never spoken to. Carter Ridge Ranch, 4,000 acres of the best grazing land in the territory. Cattle operation that employed 40 men year-round and more during drives. The kind of wealth that sat quietly and didn't need to announce itself. The kind of man who should have had no reason whatsoever to stop on a cold road for a disgraced frontier nurse. "I don't need assistance," Clara said. William Carter looked at the suitcase in her hand. He looked at the road ahead, empty, long, cold, going nowhere comfortable. "I can see you're managing," he said. There was no mockery in it. That surprised her. Then why stop? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man deciding what to say, but the quiet of a man who meant what he was about to say, and was making sure he said it right. "Because that road runs 52 miles before it hits anything with a roof and a fire," he said. "And because a woman shouldn't have to make that walk alone if she doesn't have to." People say a lot of things about what a woman should and shouldn't do. "I imagine they do," William said. "Half the men who said those things to me in the past 2 years were the same men who just ran me out of town." William didn't flinch. "I know." "Then you know their version of the story." "I know they have a version," he said. "I also know Henry Wallace, and I know what his version of any story is worth." Clara looked at him directly for the first time. There was something in his face she hadn't expected from a man of his standing. Not warmth exactly, it was too early for warmth, but something honest, something that had not been preformed for her benefit. "You heard the rumors," she said. "I heard noise," William said. "The only thing I know about you for certain is that you put Tom Eberhardt's hand back together last February, when Dunning would have taken the whole arm. Tom's my best hand. He told me what you did." Clara looked away. The road ahead. The hills. "I don't need rescuing," she said. "I'm not offering rescue," William said. "I'm offering a ride and some company on a long road. The difference matters." She stood there for a moment. Her shoulder ached. The suitcase was heavier than it had been 3 miles ago. The hills ahead had not moved any closer. "You're headed south?" she asked. "I am now," he said simply. She didn't take the horse. She let William lead the horse while she walked beside him, which was not the arrangement he'd clearly expected, but he adjusted to it without comment. They were quiet for the first half-mile. Clara was not a woman who filled silence with noise for the sake of it, and William Carter, she was beginning to understand, was not either. Finally he said, "How long were you in Dust Valley?" 2 years and 3 months. "Long time." "Long enough," she said, "to think I understood what I was dealing with." "Wallace." "Men like Wallace," Clara said. "I've met them before. Men who mistake control for competence. Men who think that owning the supplies means they own the people who use them." She paused. "I know how to handle men like that. I said no, and I said it clearly, and I thought that was enough." "It should have been." "It was enough for my conscience," Clara said. "It wasn't enough for the town." William nodded slowly. "Towns are afraid of losing their supply lines," he said. "Wallace understood that better than you did. That's not a failure of your judgment. It's a failure of theirs." Clara glanced at him sideways. "You're remarkably certain for a man who doesn't know me." "I'm certain about Wallace," William said. "The rest I'm willing to be corrected on." They stopped at midday when the road crossed a narrow creek, and Clara sat on a flat rock at the water's edge and ate the small meal she'd packed: bread and hard cheese and a folded paper of salt, while William watered his horse downstream. He didn't ask to share her food. He didn't offer his own. But when he came back upstream, he sat on a nearby rock without asking if that was all right, and after a moment he said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask," Clara said. "When you walked out of that clinic this morning, what were you walking toward?" Clara chewed, swallowed, thought about lying, and decided it wasn't worth the energy. "I don't know yet," she said. "That doesn't frighten you." "Everything frightens me," Clara said. "I've learned that fear is not a reason to stand still. It's just information." William looked at her with that same expression she couldn't quite categorize, the one that was not pity and not admiration and not calculation. "Where did you study?" he asked. "Boston, and then a year working with a physician in Philadelphia before I came west." "Why the frontier?" "Because the frontier needed people," Clara said. "Not prestige cases, not wealthy patients who could pay for several opinions. People who had one chance at surviving an infection or a bad birth or a crushing injury, and if that one chance was me, I wanted to be good enough to matter." William was quiet for a moment. "Were you?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. And for the first time that day, something in William Carter's face shifted toward something she could read clearly: respect. The storm came in from the northwest at mid-afternoon. One moment the sky was the flat, colorless gray of a cold March day. The next, a bank of black clouds had swallowed the horizon, and the wind turned sharp and mean and smelled of snow. Clara felt the change in the air before she saw it. "That's coming fast," she said. William had already turned his horse, reading the sky with the automatic expertise of a man who had lost cattle to weather and knew exactly what to take seriously. "Carter Ridge is 4 miles northeast," he said. Clara looked at the road ahead, looked at the sky. "I'm not going northeast," she said. "I'm going south." "In that storm," William said evenly. "You will not reach shelter before dark. The road gets worse after the creek crossing. The next creek runs high in spring melt, and at night, in that temperature, you are looking at serious trouble." "I'm aware of what cold does to a person," Clara said. "Then you know I'm not exaggerating." She looked at the sky again. She hated this. She hated that he was right. She hated that accepting what he was saying felt in some irrational and infuriating way, like accepting something about the whole situation she wasn't ready to accept. "The ranch," she said, "not indefinitely." "Until the storm passes," William said. "And then I continue south." "And then you continue south," he agreed. He didn't say it like a man who believed that's how it would end. Clara got the feeling he had spent some time figuring out what he did and didn't believe about a great many things. She picked up her suitcase. Carter Ridge Ranch appeared out of the driving snow like something that couldn't possibly be real. Clara had expected wealth. She had grown up hearing that William Carter's ranch was one of the most prosperous operations in the territory, and she had formed a picture in her mind of the kind of house that wealth built grand and cold and arranged to impress. She was half right. The main house was large, 2-story solid timber construction, a broad porch that wrapped around 2 sides, the kind of building that had been built to last. There were outbuildings, barns, bunkhouses, storage structures, and fencing that went on further than she could see in the snow. But it wasn't cold. There were lights in the windows, smoke from 2 chimneys. And when they came through the front door, stomping snow from their boots in the entry, the smell that hit Clara was wood smoke and coffee and something cooking on a stove. Ordinary human warmth so immediate and complete that she stopped in the doorway for a moment without meaning to. "I'll have someone show you a room," William said. "I don't need. You're wet and cold, and you've been walking since before dawn," William said. "There are 8 empty bedrooms in this house. Take one for the night." Clara looked at the staircase, at the hallway beyond, at the house that was large enough for a family and clearly visibly inhabited by one man and his hired hands. "8 bedrooms," she said. "My father built this house when he thought the family would grow," William said. His voice was even matter-of-fact, but something underneath it was not. It didn't. Clara said nothing. A ranch hand appeared from the back of the house, young, maybe 20, with a startled look that suggested William Carter did not often arrive home with company. "Mrs. Delaney still at the south cabin?" William asked. "Yes, sir. Back tomorrow." "The blue room," William said. "Make sure there's wood and water." The young man nodded and disappeared. William looked at Clara. "Mrs. Delaney keeps the house. She'll be back in the morning. Tonight you'll have to manage with whatever's in the kitchen." "I've been managing with less than whatever's in your kitchen for 2 years," Clara said. Something moved across William Carter's face that might in another man have been a smile. "I expect that's true," he said. Moi. She found the kitchen herself, and she made soup from what was there: dried beans, a ham, hock onions from a root cellar bin, herbs from a bunch hanging near the stove. She made enough for 2 without thinking about it. When William appeared in the kitchen doorway an hour later, surprised to find food already on the stove, she handed him a bowl without making any particular event of it. "You didn't have to," he started. "Sit down," Clara said. "It's hot." He sat. They ate at a kitchen table that was built for working, at not entertaining at, and Clara found herself oddly comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. There was something clarifying about a kitchen, about the particular democracy of people eating food that needed eating. "You live alone here?" she asked. 40 men in the bunkhouses," he said. "In the house." William looked at his bowl. "Yes." "How long?" 4 years, he said. "Since my brother died." Clara looked up. "Thomas," William said. "He was 26. Cattle run went wrong." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. On the frontier, those sentences explained everything and nothing. He was supposed to inherit half the ranch. After he was gone, there didn't seem to be a point in the house being any particular size. "But you kept it." "My father built it," William said. Clara nodded. She understood that kind of loyalty to an object, the way a thing could hold a person who was gone. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said. "I'm sorry about your clinic," he said. They finished eating in silence. And it was strangely a comfortable silence, not the silence of 2 strangers who had nothing to say to each other, but the silence of 2 people who had each said something real and were letting it settle. That night in the blue room, with the fire burning and the storm pushing hard against the windows, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and opened her medicine bag. She did this when she needed to think. The familiar weight of the instruments, the small glass bottles in their padded cases, the careful order of everything she had maintained, through 2 years of uncertain storage, it grounded her. It reminded her of what she was, regardless of what anyone in Dust Valley had decided she was. She took out her notebook, the one where she kept case notes, observations, the running record of what she had learned and what she still needed to understand. She opened to a new page. At the top she wrote, "Day 1." And then she sat there for a long moment, looking at those 2 words, the fire crackling behind her and the storm raging outside. She had no idea what she was counting from. The end of something, obviously. But she was beginning in some cautious and unexamined part of herself to wonder if it might also be the beginning of something else. She closed the notebook without writing anything more. Outside, the storm drove on, and somewhere downstairs in a house built for a family that hadn't grown the way it was supposed to, a man who had lost his brother and his reason for all those empty rooms sat alone with his coffee and his silence. And neither of them knew yet that the storm had done them both a favor. By morning, 3 feet of new snow had sealed every road out of Carter Ridge Ranch. Clara stood at the bedroom window and looked at it. She was not a woman who raged against things she couldn't change. She had learned that particular discipline early. But she allowed herself 2 full minutes of absolute wordless frustration before she turned from the window, put on her dress, pinned her hair, and went downstairs. William was already in the kitchen with his hat on, clearly preparing to go out to the barns. Mrs. Delaney, a solid, capable woman of about 50, who seemed to have materialized from the storm itself, was at the stove, frying salt pork, and giving Clara a measuring look that was not hostile exactly, but made clear that William Carter's household was not accustomed to surprises. "Roads are closed," Clara said to William. 2-3 days at least," he said. "I see. You're welcome to stay until they're clear." I understand that's not optional. I was trying to make it feel less like a prison sentence, William said, pulling on his coat. A prison sentence would have honest walls, Clara said. This is weather. I appreciate the difference. Mrs. Delaney made a sound that might have been a laugh quickly suppressed. William looked at Clara with that measuring expression she was beginning to recognize as his default, the look of a man who was revising his opinion of something in real time. One of my ranch hands came in last night with a hand injury, he said. Nothing critical, but it's been bothering him. If you wanted something to do this morning. Clara looked at him. I'm not offering payment, William added quickly. And if you'd rather not. Where is he? Clara said. The ranch hand's name was Denny. He was 19, embarrassed about needing attention, and had been nursing a deep cut on his palm that had been inadequately cleaned and was beginning to show the early signs of infection. Clara cleaned it properly while Denny sat on a stool in the barn trying to pretend it didn't hurt, which it clearly did. This has been untreated for how long? Clara asked. 2 days, Denny said. I thought it would close on its own. Wounds like this don't close on their own. They close wrong. She worked carefully, efficiently, with the automatic confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Hold still. Denny held still. You're the nurse from Dust Valley, he said. I was. Tom says you fixed his hand so good the doctor in Harlan's Creek said he couldn't tell which fingers had been crushed. Tom's hand was cooperative, Clara said. Yours is being difficult. Denny grinned. Sorry. Don't apologize. Just hold still. She finished bandaging, gave him clear instructions, told him what to watch for, and sent him back to work. Then she stood in the barn for a moment looking at her hands. She had forgotten what it felt like. Not the work itself, she hadn't forgotten that, but the particular feeling of doing the work without the weight of judgment over it, of just being good at something and having that be the whole story. She packed her supplies back into her bag and went to find William. She found him in the north barn, working alongside 3 ranch hands on a piece of equipment that had broken in the storm. He was not directing from a distance. He had his sleeves rolled up and grease on his forearms and was doing the actual work alongside the men who worked for him. Clara stopped. She had met wealthy men. She had worked alongside enough of them to have a clear picture of what they thought labor was for and who it was for. William Carter was not that picture. He saw her, nodded, and came over while the other men continued working. How's Denny's hand? Infected but manageable, Clara said. I cleaned it and dressed it. He needs to keep it dry and watch for spreading redness. If you see him favoring it, or if there's fever, come find me. William nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me. He should have had that cleaned 2 days ago. She paused. Is there a medical kit on this ranch? There's a box of supplies in the main house. I'd like to look at it. Why? Because I am going to be here for 2 to 3 days with no particular occupation, Clara said, and because I would rather know what resources are available than not know, in case something happens. William looked at her for a moment. The box is in the kitchen pantry, he said, left of the flour bin. Clara nodded and turned back toward the house. Miss Whitmore. She stopped. The men know you're here, William said. Any of them need something looked at, anything. Is it all right if they ask? Clara turned around. Of course it's all right, she said. That's what I'm for. She walked back to the house through the snow, and William Carter stood in the doorway of the north barn and watched her go with an expression that none of his ranch hands were experienced enough to name. But they noticed it. They all noticed it. By the end of the first full day, Clara had cleaned and restocked the medical kit, treated a mild case of frostbite on a ranch hand's toes, identified a storage problem in the supply room that was allowing cold air to damage bandaging materials, and sat for 45 minutes with an older hand named Garrett, who had a persistent cough that had been dismissed as nothing for 2 months. It was not nothing. She told him so clearly and without softening it, and also told him what he needed to do and what to watch for and what would happen if he ignored it. Garrett stared at her when she finished. Dr. Horton in Harlan's Creek told me it was just dust, he said. Dr. Horton is wrong, Clara said. Just like that. Just like that, Clara said. I am not in the business of telling people things sound better than they are. You deserve an honest account of your own body. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Tom was right about you. Tom's hand, Clara said, is the thing I'm most proud of in 2 years of work. He told Mr. Carter that. Mr. Carter mentioned it. Did he tell you? Garrett stopped. Tell me what? Garrett seemed to be working something out. Tom's accident. He almost didn't come to you. Some people in town were already saying things by then. Tom was worried about... He stopped again. He came anyway. He said his hand was worth more than gossip. Clara was quiet. I want you to know that, Garrett said. Not everyone believed what Wallace said. Some of us just didn't. He looked down at his hands. We didn't speak up loud enough. Clara looked at this old man with his troubling cough and his honest eyes. No, she said evenly. You didn't. Garrett nodded. He deserved that. But you're speaking now, Clara said. Get some rest. Keep that chest warm and don't sleep in the drafty end of the bunkhouse. She closed her bag and left. Dub. That evening Clara found William in the study, a room lined with books and maps and the organized residue of a working operation. He was at his desk with a ledger open in front of him, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorway. Can I ask you something? Clara said. You can ask, he said. It was exactly what she had said to him at the creek, and she noticed that he'd used her own words back at her. She wasn't sure if that was deliberate. Tom Eberhardt's accident, she said. What do you know about it? William leaned back slightly. He was caught in a stampede. Cattle came through a fence that gave way. His hand was under a hoof before anyone could get to him. He told you about coming to me. He told me you worked on him for 4 hours and that you explained everything you were doing while you did it. Because, and I'm quoting Tom here, you said a man has a right to know what's happening to his own hand. Clara stood in the doorway for a moment. He nearly didn't come, she said. Because of what people were already saying. I know. Why didn't you... She stopped herself. Why didn't I what may? William said. Speak up, Clara said. You knew me by reputation. You knew Tom's account. Wallace was spreading lies, and you knew what those lies were worth. You told me so on the road today. Why didn't you say something? William was quiet. It was a longer quiet than his usual ones. Because I don't involve myself in town politics, he finally said. That's not an answer, Clara said. That's a policy. He looked at her. You're right, he said. It is a policy. And sitting here tonight, I am not entirely comfortable with it. That was not the answer Clara had expected. She had expected a justification, a reasonable-sounding explanation. The kinds of words men like Henry Wallace used to dress up decisions that benefited themselves. William Carter had given her something else, an admission. I'll remember that you said so, Clara said. She left him at his desk. And in the long quiet of the ranch house that night, with the fire burning down and the storm finally easing its pressure against the walls, something shifted between the two of them, small, almost invisible, like the first degree of change in a weather vane before the wind turns. Neither of them had a name for it yet. But it was there, and it was real. The storm broke on the third morning. Clara knew it before she looked out the window. She could feel it in the quality of the silence, the way the house had stopped bracing itself against something, and simply settled back into its ordinary weight. She lay in the blue room for exactly 2 minutes, listening to that new quiet, and then she got up dressed and went downstairs. She had made a decision in the night. She would leave today. The roads would be passable by midday. She would thank William Carter for his hospitality, say goodbye to Garrett and Denny and the other men she had treated over the past 3 days, and she would pick up her suitcase and walk south. That was the plan. She walked into the kitchen and found Mrs. Delaney at the stove and William already at the table with his coffee and his ledger, and the scene was so domestically ordinary that it stopped her for a half second in the doorway. the kind of ordinary she had not been inside of in so long. She had nearly forgotten what it looked like from the inside. "Roads will be open by noon," she said, pouring herself coffee without asking where the cups were, because she had already learned where everything was in this kitchen. "They will," William agreed, without looking up from his ledger. "I'll leave after noon then." William turned a page. "All right." Mrs. Delaney set a plate of biscuits on the table and gave Clara a look that communicated several things simultaneously, none of which Clara was prepared to respond to before her first cup of coffee. She sat down. She ate a biscuit. She drank her coffee. William turned another page. "There's something wrong with your supply records," Clara said. William looked up. "I wasn't prying," she said immediately. "I was looking for the inventory of medical supplies. I wanted to make sure I'd restocked correctly before I left. The supply ledger was on the shelf next to the medical kit. I looked at it because I needed to know what you had before the accident and what I'd used. And 3 of the line items don't match the physical inventory," Clara said. "I counted everything in the storage room yesterday. What's recorded as being there and what's actually there are 2 different numbers." William set his pen down. "By how much?" "Enough," Clara said, "that it's not a counting error." She showed him what she'd found after breakfast, spreading the ledger pages on the kitchen table, while Mrs. Delaney found reasons to be in another part of the house. The discrepancies were clear once you knew to look for them. Medical supplies, bandaging, carbolic acid, specific medications recorded as received and stored, but not physically present. The differences were consistent across several months. Not random, not mistakes. Someone had been taking things out and recording them as still there. "How long have you had the same person managing supplies?" Clara asked. William was looking at the ledger with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not anger, something more careful than anger. "My business partner handles the supply accounts," he said slowly. "Samuel Reed. He's been with the operation for 6 years. Is he the only one who has access to the storage records? He manages them. I review quarterly." "When was the last quarterly review?" William was quiet for a moment. "December." "It's March," Clara said. William looked at her. "I'm not saying I know what this means," Clara said carefully. "I'm saying the numbers don't match. There may be an innocent explanation." "You don't think there's an innocent explanation," William said. "I think you should find out before you decide what you think," Clara said. "That's all." William stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment with his hands in his pockets and his back to her, and Clara waited, because she understood that what she had just handed him was not information. It was the end of something he hadn't known was ending. 6 years, he said. "I know." "He was at my brother's funeral," William said. Clara said nothing. "He helped me hold this operation together in the year after Thomas died." William's voice was even, controlled. The voice of a man pressing very hard on something that wanted to come apart. "I trusted him with things I didn't trust anyone else with." "That's what made him useful," Clara said quietly. "Not to you, to himself." William turned around. The expression on his face was one she recognized. She had seen it on patients who had just been told something true and unwelcome about their own bodies. The particular look of a person adjusting to a reality that was not the one they'd been living in. "I'll look into it," he said. "You should," Clara said. "Today. While I'm still here and can show you exactly what I found." William looked at her for a moment. "You were leaving at noon." "I can leave at 2, Clara said. She didn't leave at 2. She didn't leave at all that day, because by 2 o'clock, what had started as a discrepancy in the medical supply ledger had unraveled into something considerably larger, and Clara found herself sitting at the kitchen table with 3 years of supply records spread across every surface, while William worked in methodical silence and Mrs. Delaney kept hot coffee appearing without being asked. The more they looked, the more they found. It wasn't just the medical supplies. feed invoices with altered quantities, lumber deliveries recorded as received in amounts that didn't match the physical lumber on the property, equipment purchases billed at prices that bore no relationship to the actual market rate, the difference clearly pocketed before the records were closed. Samuel Reed had been systematically bleeding Carter Ridge Ranch for at least 3 years. Not quickly, not greedily, with the particular patience of someone who understood that slow theft is invisible theft, that if you take a little from enough places over enough time, the total becomes enormous before anyone adds it up. He was counting on you not adding it up, Clara said. I gave him no reason to think I would, William said. His voice had gone flat, not cold flat in the way of something that has burned down to coals. You trusted him. I trusted him. That's not a failure of your intelligence, Clara said. It's a failure of his character. William looked at a page in the ledger without seeing it. I built this operation on trust, he said. My father built it the same way. A man gives you his word and you take it because without that none of this works. None of it. You can't run 40 men on suspicion. No, Clara agreed. But you can't run 40 men on willful blindness either. William looked at her. That came out harder than I intended, Clara said. No, William said. It came out honestly. That's not the same thing. He closed the ledger. How did you see it? He asked. You've been here 3 days. I was looking at the medical supplies specifically, Clara said. And I was looking with fresh eyes. I didn't have 6 years of trust telling me the numbers were probably right. You saw it because you had no reason to trust the record. I saw it because I count things, Clara said. I always count the actual supplies, not what the record says, what's physically there. I learned that early the difference between what a chart says a patient is doing and what the patient is actually doing can be a life. William was quiet for a long moment. I need to ride to Harlan's Creek, he said. I need to speak with the county land office before Samuel knows I've started looking. Why the land office? Because if he's been manipulating the supply accounts for 3 years, I want to know whether he's touched anything related to the land titles. William's jaw tightened. Carter Ridge Ranch is 4,000 acres. The titles are registered, but they go through the county record. If he's been building a case to challenge ownership... He stopped. Clara understood. A man who stole quietly and carefully for 3 years wasn't stealing for the sake of stealing. He was building toward something. Go today, Clara said. Now, before the afternoon gets late. You'll be here when I get back. Clara looked at her suitcase sitting by the front door where she had put it at noon. She looked at the ledgers on the table. She looked at William Carter, who had spent 3 days showing her something she had genuinely not expected to find in a wealthy man on the Montana frontier, and who was now looking at her with an expression that was not asking her to stay, but that would she thought be profoundly altered if she didn't. I'll be here, she said. Dead. He rode out within the hour, and Clara spent the afternoon doing what she did when she needed to think clearly. She worked. She reorganized the entire supply room. She made a complete physical inventory of everything on the ranch that related to medical supplies, recorded it in a clean ledger page in her own handwriting, and then went through the old records and created a comparison document that showed every discrepancy, dated and sourced. If William was going to confront Samuel Reed, he needed evidence that was airtight. Garrett found her in the supply room, mid-afternoon, leaning in the doorway with his arms crossed. Mr. Carter rode out fast, he said. He had business in Harlan's Creek, Clara said, without looking up. Business that couldn't wait. Apparently not. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Something wrong. Clara looked up. This old man with his difficult cough and his honest eyes. When did Mr. Reed last visit the ranch? She asked. Garrett thought. 3 weeks ago, maybe. Spent 2 days. Went through the supply rooms and the equipment barn. Did he take anything with him when he left? Garrett frowned. Had a full wagon. I assumed it was supplies he was taking to the mill in Harlan's Creek for storage. Did Mr. Carter authorize that wagon? Garrett's frown deepened. Because if he didn't, Clara said carefully, that wagon was the last load. She watched Garrett understand what she was saying, watched the realization move across his face, like weather across an open field, slow, and then suddenly everywhere at once. Son of a... Garrett stopped himself, looked at Clara. Excuse me. I've heard worse, Clara said. Go back to work, and don't say anything to anyone until Mr. Carter gets back. Yes, ma'am, Garrett said with a gravity that would have belonged to a soldier. William returned at dusk, and Clara knew before he said a word that what he had found in Harlan's Creek was worse than what he'd been afraid of. He came through the front door and went directly to the study, and Clara followed him without being invited, because this was not the moment for waiting to be asked. He spread a document on the desk. There are 2 land title challenges on file, he said, both registered in the past 8 months, both citing an irregularity in the original Carter land grant from 1861. Clara looked at the documents. Are the irregularities real? No. My father's original title is clean. I have the records. William's voice was steady, but his hands placing those documents on the desk were not entirely steady. But a challenge doesn't need to be real to cost time and money and legal process. And if the challenges are registered by someone who also controls the supply accounts and can demonstrate that the ranch has been operating at a financial loss, he could make the case that you can't afford to defend the title, Clara said, at which point the land goes into dispute and Samuel steps in as an interested party with a prior relationship to the operation. William sat down in his chair. He planned this. Years. He has been building this for years. And he timed it for now, Clara said. Spring. The start of cattle season. When you're most stretched financially and logistically. When I'd be least able to fight it. Clara sat down across from him. How much of this can you prove? She asked. The land title challenges are filed. That's public record. The supply discrepancies, what you found, I can document those. But Samuel has the originals of several key records. If he destroys them before I can get a copy. He doesn't know you've started looking, Clara said. Not yet. Then you have a window, Clara said. Whatever documents exist that you don't already have in hand, you need to get them before Samuel knows you're looking. How much access does he have to records in Harlan's Creek? He's a registered agent for the ranch's business accounts, William said. He can access most things. But you're the principal owner. You can access everything. Yes. Then you go back to Harlan's Creek tomorrow with a lawyer and you access everything, Clara said. You pull every record that touches Carter Ridge Ranch and you put it somewhere Samuel Reed cannot get to it. William looked at her. You're strategizing like a lawyer, he said. I'm strategizing like someone who spent 2 years watching a man build a case against me piece by piece, Clara said. The mechanics are the same. The only difference is that you still have time to cut him off. I didn't cut Wallace off. No, Clara said, but I'm here now. The words fell into the room and sat there between them. Clara had not planned to say exactly that. She wasn't certain what she meant by it. But she watched William Carter's face change when she said it watched something in him settle the way a structure settles when a keystone is placed, and she thought that whatever she had meant, it had landed as something true. I'll ride out at first light, William said. I'll have the comparison document ready before you go, Clara said. Every discrepancy I found dated and cross-referenced. You can take it with you. Clara. It was the first time he had used her name without the formal prefix. Neither of them remarked on it. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Clara said. Samuel Reed is going to find out you're looking. What matters is whether you're ready when he does. Jeet. She worked until past midnight on the comparison document, and William sat in the study reading through 3 years of his own records, with the focused attention of a man who was learning page by page the shape of a betrayal he had not seen coming. At one point, close to 11, he appeared in the doorway of the kitchen where Clara was working. You should sleep, he said. So should you, she replied without looking up. He disappeared back to the study. An hour later, she brought 2 cups of coffee and set one on his desk without interrupting what he was reading. "You were going to leave today," he said, still reading. "I was." "Do you regret staying?" Clara thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "Do you regret asking me to—" "I didn't ask you to," William said, looking up. "I asked if you'd be here when I got back. That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" He held her gaze for a moment. "No," he said. "One is a request, the other is a hope." Clara picked up her coffee. "Then no," she said. "I don't regret it." She went back to the kitchen. She was not a woman who examined things like that too closely when they were still forming. She had learned that some things needed time before they could bear the weight of examination. But she worked the rest of that night with something lighter inside her than she'd had in months. And William left for Harlan's Creek at first light with Clara's document, a lawyer he'd sent a rider ahead to wake, and the particular grim focus of a man who understood exactly what he stood to lose. Clara spent the morning with the men on the ranch, and this is when she began to understand something about Carter Ridge Ranch that the ledgers could not have told her. There were 40 men in those bunkhouses. Men from half a dozen different backgrounds, cowboys and former miners. Men who'd come west from places that hadn't worked out and found something here that did. A younger man from Tennessee who'd come looking for opportunity and found that William Carter paid fairly and didn't ask questions about your past. An older Mexican vaquero named Augustin, who had been with the Carter family since William's father's time and who knew the land better than any map. And to a man, every one of them spoke about William Carter the same way. Not with the deference of men who feared their employer, with something else, something that Clara, moving through that morning, listening and treating and organizing, began to identify with increasing certainty. Loyalty. Real loyalty. The kind that's earned rather than demanded. "He works the same hours we do," Denny told her, flexing his healing hand while Clara checked the bandage. "Most men with what he's got, they supervise. Mr. Carter gets dirty." "He remembers things," said a hand named Fletcher. "My wife had a difficult time last fall with our youngest. 2 weeks later, Mr. Carter came by and asked how she was, by name. I didn't tell him her name. He found out," said Augustin, who had drifted over to listen. "He makes it his business to know the people who work for him. Not as workers, as people." Clara worked and listened and thought. This was what Samuel Reed had been stealing from. Not just the money, not just the supplies. He had been stealing from something that had taken a lifetime to build the particular kind of trust that existed between William Carter and these men, the invisible thing that made 40 people work as one operation. If Samuel's scheme had succeeded, if the land had gone into dispute and the financial pressure had mounted and the ranch had started to fail, these men would have lost not just their employment, but the closest thing many of them had to a stable place in the world. That made Clara angrier than anything about her own situation had made her. William was back by late afternoon, and the expression on his face when he walked through the door told Clara what she needed to know before he said a word. "He's already moving," William said. "What happened?" "I got to the county land office at 8 o'clock this morning. My lawyer served notice to freeze the business accounts linked to Carter Ridge pending review." William set his hat on the table. "By 10 o'clock, Samuel Reed had been in the land office. My man there told me. He found out you were coming." "Someone told him. I don't know who." William's jaw tightened. "He got there before the freeze was completed. Pulled 2 documents from the business files." "Which documents?" "The original supply contracts from 2010 through 2012. The years where the discrepancies would be hardest to explain without the originals." Clara absorbed this. "But your comparison document shows the discrepancy in those years." "My comparison document is my document," William said. "Without the originals to compare it to, Samuel can argue, I falsified it." "You need a corroborating witness," Clara said. "I need someone who can testify to what the actual supply figures should have been during those years." William looked at her. Someone with independent knowledge of medical supply quantities and costs. The room was quiet for a moment. I treated patients in Dust Valley for 2 years, Clara said slowly. I ordered supplies. I know exactly what the standard quantities and costs were for a ranch medical operation of this size. I could testify to what the numbers in those contracts should have looked like. That's what I was thinking, William said. Samuel Reed will try to discredit me, Clara said. He already has a relationship with Wallace. The moment he knows I'm involved, he will use every rumor Wallace started to undermine whatever I say. I know. You understand what you're asking, Clara said. You're asking me to go back into a public situation where people have already decided they don't trust me and put myself in front of them again. Yes, William said. I know what I'm asking. Why should I? The question fell cleanly without heat. It was a genuine question, and William treated it as one. He looked at her directly. Because 40 men and their families depend on this ranch. Because what Samuel Reed did is wrong, and the only way to stop him from doing it again to someone else somewhere else is to hold him accountable here. Because you know the truth and you're one of the only people who can prove it. He paused. And because no one should be able to take a person's reputation and use it as a weapon without being made to answer for it. Clara looked at him. That last reason, she said. Is that for me or for you? Both, William said. If we're being honest. Clara stood up. She walked to the window, looked out at the ranch, at the barns, and the fencing and the bunkhouses where 40 men were finishing a day's work, unaware that the ground beneath their feet was being systematically undermined by a man they had probably shaken hands with. There's something else you're not saying, she said. William was quiet. He's going to move on this fast now that he knows you're looking, Clara said. Whatever he's planning to do next, he's going to do it before you can get organized. What's his next move? He'll go to Dust Valley, William said. Clara turned around. Why Dust Valley? Because the ranch's primary credit relationship is with the Dust Valley Merchant Bank, the bank that Wallace controls. William's voice was even, carrying enormous weight very quietly. If Samuel approaches Wallace and presents evidence that Carter Ridge Ranch is in financial irregularity, evidence that Samuel himself manufactured, Wallace can call the ranch's credit line, which would force a formal financial review, which with the land title challenges already filed, would give a judge reason to freeze ranch operations while everything was sorted out. And while operations are frozen, Clara said, the cattle can't be moved, the payroll can't be met, the men leave. William's expression didn't change. And Samuel and Wallace pick up the pieces at a fraction of their value. Clara stared at him. She had known men like Wallace. She had known what he was. She had not known about Samuel Reed. She had not known that something this carefully planned, this patient, this deliberate had been building in the shadow of something as real and decent as what William Carter had built. When did you figure out all of this? She asked. My lawyer laid it out for me this afternoon, William said. He's been working on the county side for years. He recognized the pattern. How long do you have before Samuel reaches Wallace? If he's already moving, maybe 2 days. 3 if we're lucky. Clara looked at her suitcase, still sitting by the front door where she'd put it 3 days ago. Then she looked at William. I'll need to see everything your lawyer has, she said. Every document, every piece of the timeline. I need to understand this completely before I can be useful as a witness. I can have him here by tomorrow morning. Then have him here by tomorrow morning, Clara said. And William. He looked at her at the use of his name. When this is over, she said, and I testify, and we prove what Samuel did, I am still going to need to think about where I go from here. I'm not making you a promise about anything beyond this. I'm not asking for one, William said. I know, Clara said. I'm saying it anyway, because I think it's important that we both understand what this is. What is it? William asked quietly. Clara thought about it. 2 people doing what's right, she said. For now, that's enough. William nodded slowly. For now, he said. That's enough. Outside, the last light was leaving the sky over Carter Ridge Ranch, and somewhere in Harlan's Creek, Samuel Reed was already in motion, carrying his manufactured evidence toward Dust Valley and the man who would use it against them. And inside this house, a woman who had walked away from everything 3 days ago was sitting back down at a table with a man who had every reason to trust no one, and they were choosing quietly without drama, with the particular seriousness of people who understood what choosing cost to stand together. Neither of them used that word yet, but it was the word that fit. William's lawyer arrived at Carter Ridge Ranch the next morning, before the sun was fully up. His name was Everett Marsh, and he was the kind of man who carried his profession in his posture precise, unhurried with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong word at the wrong moment cost someone everything. He came in, set his case on the kitchen table, looked at Clara once with sharp evaluating eyes, and then proceeded to treat her as a full participant in the conversation without being asked to. Clara appreciated that more than she let on. Marsh spread his documents across the table and laid out what he knew in clean sequential order. The 2 land title challenges were registered under a shell company that traced with some legal digging back to Samuel Reed. The financial discrepancies Clara had identified aligned precisely with periods when Samuel had served as sole signatory on the ranch's supply accounts, and the documents Samuel had removed from the county office the previous day, the supply contracts from the early years, were the only originals that could directly contradict the pattern of manipulation. Without those originals, Marsh said, his counter-argument is that someone at Carter Ridge altered the internal records, and since the only person who touched those records recently is Miss Whitmore. He'll say I fabricated it, Clara said. He'll say exactly that, Marsh confirmed. A woman who was already removed from her position in Dust Valley under a cloud of professional misconduct, who arrived at Carter Ridge Ranch under unclear circumstances, who was given access to private financial records within days of her arrival. He paused. I'm telling you what he'll argue, not what I believe. I understand the difference, Clara said. The question, Marsh continued, is whether we can establish an independent evidentiary foundation that doesn't rely on the internal records at all. He looked at Clara. Miss Whitmore, you mentioned you have direct knowledge of standard medical supply costs and quantities from your time in Dust Valley. 2 years of ordering, receiving, and rationing supplies, Clara said. I kept my own records, separate from the clinic's official ledger, because the official ledger was managed by the town council, and I didn't trust it not to be adjusted after the fact. She looked at William. My personal records are in my suitcase. William looked at her. I keep records of everything, Clara said simply. I told you I count what's actually there, not what the ledger says. Marsh leaned forward. Those personal records, if they reflect standard pricing and quantity expectations for the territory during the same period, could establish a baseline against which the ranch's manipulated figures become demonstrably fraudulent. Without needing the originals, Samuel took. They will, Clara said. I can walk you through every line. They worked for 3 hours at that kitchen table. Clara's personal notebooks opened alongside Marsh's legal documents and William's ranch records, building the case piece by piece. Mrs. Delaney kept coffee coming and asked no questions, and at one point quietly brought in a plate of food that all 3 of them ate without pausing the conversation. By mid-morning, the shape of what they had was clear. It was not airtight. Nothing in a legal dispute ever was. But it was solid enough that a judge reviewing it would have serious questions for Samuel Reed that Samuel could not answer without either producing the documents he'd taken or explaining why he'd taken them. There's one more thing we need, Marsh said, closing his case. The testimony of someone in Dust Valley, William said. Someone who can speak to the supply purchasing patterns from the other side. Marsh agreed. A merchant, a supplier. Someone who sold to both the clinic and the ranch during the relevant period, and can confirm the pricing and quantities Miss Whitmore's records reflect. Clara was already thinking. Tom Fielding at the Dust Valley General Store. He supplied both the clinic and the ranch operations for 3 years. He keeps meticulous records, I know, because I had to fight with him twice about his invoices, and I saw his books both times. Would he testify? William asked. Tom Fielding is not a man who involves himself in disputes willingly, Clara said slowly. But Tom Fielding is also not a man who likes being made a fool of. If Samuel Reed used his store records as part of this scheme, and if someone shows Tom exactly how that was done, his pride will bring him in faster than any legal summons. Marsh almost smiled. You know these people well. I treated Tom's wife through a kidney infection last spring, Clara said. She would have died without intervention. Tom knows it. He never spoke up for me when Wallace started the rumors, and that has sat with him. I could see it on his face every time I passed him on the street in those last months. She paused. Sometimes the way to move a man is to give him the chance to do what he already knows he should have done. William was watching her with that expression she had catalogued, the one that was revision and recognition at once. I'll go to Dust Valley, he said. Not alone, Clara said. I'll have Marsh with me. And when Samuel Reed hears you're in Dust Valley asking questions which he will hear within hours, what do you think he does next? The table was quiet. He moves on the bank, William said. He moves on the bank, Clara confirmed. He goes to Wallace, and he presents whatever he has doctored or not, and he asks Wallace to call the credit line before you can get back. So when you ride into Dust Valley, you need to be riding in with something that stops Wallace from moving even if he wants to. What stops a man like Wallace? Marsh asked. Exposure, Clara said. The credible threat that everything he and Samuel have done will become public record examined in open court with Samuel's testimony, which he will absolutely give to reduce his own liability, detailing exactly how much Wallace knew and when. We don't have that evidence yet, William said. No, Clara said. But Wallace doesn't know exactly what we have, and men like Wallace are fundamentally risk-averse. They act boldly when they believe they're invisible. The moment they think they might be seen, they stop. Marsh was looking at her with open assessment. Miss Whitmore, have you considered practicing law? I considered it briefly, Clara said. Then I considered that I'd rather save lives than argue about them. In this case, Marsh said dryly, you may be doing both. The problem announced itself before noon. Garrett came in from the south fence line with his hat in his hand, and a look on his face that Clara recognized immediately as the look of a man delivering news he wished he didn't have. Ryder came in from Harlan's Creek, Garrett said. Carried a message for Mr. Carter. He handed William a folded note. William read it. His face didn't change, but something behind it did, the way the expression of a controlled man changes when controlled is taking all the effort he has. What is it? Clara asked. William set the note on the table. Samuel moved faster than we thought. He was in Dust Valley yesterday evening. Wallace has already called a preliminary review of the credit line. There's a meeting scheduled at the Merchant Bank the day after tomorrow. Day after tomorrow, Marsh said, standing. That's not enough time to... It's enough time, Clara said. Both men looked at her. It's enough time if we move today, she said. William, you and Marsh ride for Dust Valley now. Not tomorrow, now. She was already thinking through the sequence. Marsh files the formal fraud complaint with the county office in Dust Valley before end of business today. Not Harlan's Creek Dust Valley, because that's where the bank is, and that's where the jurisdiction lands. The moment that complaint is filed, the bank's review is legally complicated. Wallace can't call the credit line while a fraud complaint naming his business partner is active and unresolved. He'll fight the complaint, Marsh said. Of course he'll fight it. But fighting it takes time, and time is what we need. Clara turned to William. While Marsh is at the county office, you go to Tom Fielding. You show him what we found. Not everything enough. Enough that Tom understands what his store records were used for and who used them. And if Tom won't help, William asked. Then you come back and we find another way, Clara said. But he'll help. William stood up. The decision was made in his face before he spoke it. Garrett, have my horse ready in 10 minutes and saddle one for Mr. Marsh. Garrett was already moving. William looked at Clara. You're not coming. No, Clara said. I need to be here. Why? Because Samuel Reed doesn't know exactly what I found or how much of it I documented, Clara said. If he thinks there's a chance I have information he hasn't accounted for, he may make a move here at the ranch to find out what it is. And I need to be here if he does. William went very still. If Samuel comes here, I can handle Samuel Reed, Clara said. He's a thief and a manipulator. I've handled men like him before. I handled Wallace for 2 years before he found a way around me. Her voice was steady. The difference is that this time I'm not alone. Something moved in William's expression, something that was not appropriate to examine or name at this moment, with Marsh standing at the table and Garrett coming with horses. Augustine stays with you, William said, and Denny. Fine, Clara said. And you don't let Samuel into this house. I wasn't planning to, Clara said. William picked up his hat. He looked at her one more time, the kind of look that carries things that aren't being said, that has weight and direction even without words. Then he walked out. The afternoon passed in its own tense quiet. Clara organized. It was what she did when tension tried to get the better of her. She organized. She prepared. She made sure that whatever came next found her ready. She went through her personal notebooks a second time and created a clean summary document of the supply pricing data indexed by date and cross-referenced against the ranch records. She sealed it in an envelope and gave it to Denny with instructions to ride for Harlan's Creek and deliver it to Marsh's office if anything happened at the ranch before William returned. Denny looked at her with 19-year-old seriousness. What kind of anything? If anyone comes onto this property who isn't a ranch employee or Mr. Carter, Clara said, you ride. You don't wait. You ride. Yes, ma'am. She found Augustine in the barn and explained enough of the situation that he understood what he was watching for. The old vaquero listened without interrupting and then said in his measured way, I have known Samuel Reed for 6 years. I have never trusted him. I did not say so because it was not my place. It's your place now, Clara said. Yes, Augustine said. It is. She went back to the house and sat with Mrs. Delaney in the kitchen and drank coffee and did not talk about what was happening because Mrs. Delaney was a woman who understood that some hours required quiet company rather than conversation, and they were both that kind of woman. Around 3 in the afternoon, Mrs. Delaney said without preamble, He hasn't had someone in this house who mattered in 4 years. Clara looked at her. I'm not telling you what to do with that, Mrs. Delaney said. I'm just telling you it's true. Clara looked at her coffee cup. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. It was more honest than she had intended. Nobody does, Mrs. Delaney said. That's not a reason not to do it. Samuel Reed arrived at Carter Ridge Ranch at 4:30 in the afternoon. He came alone, which told Clara he didn't know William was gone, or if he did, he'd underestimated what was waiting in William's absence. He rode up to the main house without hesitation, dismounted with the ease of someone who had done it many times, and knocked on the front door. Clara opened it. She watched Samuel Reed's face in the half-second before he controlled it. Surprise, then calculation, then a version of pleasantry that he arranged quickly and wore like a coat that didn't quite fit. He was perhaps 45, well-dressed in the way of a man who wanted to be perceived as prosperous, with the kind of face that was probably attractive at 30 and had since become something that required more careful reading. Miss Whitmore, he said, and the use of her name told her he had already learned a great deal about the last 3 days. I didn't expect to find you here. I imagine not, Clara said. She did not step back from the doorway. Is William available? He's not on the property. Reed absorbed this. When do you expect him? I don't, Clara said. Is there something I can help you with? Reed looked at her with new assessment. He had come here for something specific, and her presence had changed his calculation of how to get it. I'm an old friend of William's, Reed said. I've been managing his business interests for years. I heard there'd been some confusion about the supply records, and I wanted to help clarify. That's very helpful of you, Clara said. You can clarify to his lawyer when they meet. I'll let William know you stopped by. She began to close the door. "Miss Whitmore." She stopped. Reed's voice had changed. The pleasantry was gone. What replaced it was not threatening exactly. It was the voice of a man who was accustomed to being the most patient person in any room. "I think we should talk," he said. "You're new here. You don't have the full picture of how things work between William and me. I'd hate for you to find yourself in a difficult position because of a misunderstanding." Clara looked at him steadily. "What kind of difficult position?" "You've been through something hard in Dust Valley," Reed said. "People there have the wrong idea about you. That can be corrected. I have relationships there that could be useful to someone in your situation. But those relationships only work if there's mutual goodwill." He let that sit. Clara understood it perfectly. He was offering to fix her reputation in exchange for not stated but clear whatever she had found in those supply records. "That's a generous offer," Clara said. "It is," Reed agreed. "Tell me something," Clara said. "When you took those contracts from the county office yesterday morning, did you burn them immediately, or are you holding them in case you need them later?" Reed's face went absolutely still. "I don't know what you're—" "The county clerk noted the time you arrived and the documents you accessed," Clara said. "He noted it because Marsh had been there 2 hours earlier and asked him to note anyone who came in asking about Carter Ridge accounts." She held Reed's gaze without blinking. "You took the original supply contracts from 2010 through 2012. You took them because they're the only documents that directly contradict the altered figures in the ranch records. But here's what you didn't account for." She paused. "I don't need those contracts," Clara said. "My personal records from 2 years of frontier nursing practice establish the standard supply pricing for this territory with enough precision that any judge can compare them to your figures and identify the manipulation without a single original document." Reed's face had changed. The calculation was still there, but something underneath it was moving fast. "You can't," he started. "I already did," Clara said. "Everything I found is documented, dated, signed, and in the hands of 3 separate people who are not on this property." She looked at him with the same even clarity she used when telling a patient something they didn't want to hear. "You should go, Mr. Reed. You should go, and you should think very carefully about what you do next, because the position you're in right now gives you one good option, and it requires you to move quickly." "And what option is that?" Reed said, his voice flat. "Cooperate with the county investigation before it formally names you," Clara said. "Because once it formally names you, the only person you're protecting is Henry Wallace, and I promise you that Henry Wallace is not protecting you." She closed the door. She stood on the other side of it, perfectly still, listening to the sound of Reed standing on the porch for a long moment before she heard his boots on the steps and then the sound of a horse leaving the yard. Then she allowed herself to lean against the door for exactly 5 seconds. Her hands were not entirely steady. She straightened up, went to the kitchen, and told Mrs. Delaney to send Denny to find Augustin because she needed to get a message to William in Dust Valley immediately. The message reached William 2 hours later, carried by the fastest rider on the ranch. He and Marsh were still in Dust Valley, and what they had accomplished in the hours since their arrival had been considerable. The fraud complaint was filed. Tom Fielding had heard enough of the story to pull his own records and confirm 3 separate pricing discrepancies in invoices he recognized as having gone through Samuel Reed. But the message from Clara changed everything. "He showed his hand," William said, reading it. Marsh looked at the message over his shoulder. "He offered her a trade. She didn't take it." "No," Marsh said. "She turned it around on him." He looked at William with something approaching wonder. "She told him the documents he took were irrelevant. Is that true? She said her personal records would establish the baseline without them." William folded the message. "I believe her. The more pressing concern," Marsh said, "is what Reed does now. If he believes the case against him is already strong enough to survive without those documents. He has 2 choices, cooperate or accelerate." "He'll go to Wallace tonight," William said. "And if Wallace accelerates the bank review, we have to move first." William turned to find Tom Fielding, who was still standing at his store counter with his account books open in front of him, and the expression of a man who had just added up something he deeply wished didn't sum to what it summed to. "Tom," William said. Fielding looked up. "I need one more thing from you." Tom Fielding did not enjoy the next 2 hours. He was a practical man, not a bold one, and what William was asking required a kind of boldness he had spent his entire adult life carefully avoiding. But he stood in the Dust Valley Merchant Bank at 6 o'clock in the evening, with his account books in his hands and his jaw set, and he said to the bank's manager with Wallace, seated right there in the room, summoned for an emergency meeting about the Carter credit review, what he had been carrying without saying for months. "These are my records," Tom said. 3 years of supply invoices. And I am telling you under my name and my business reputation that these prices and quantities, the ones filed with the Carter Ridge accounts, do not match what I charged or delivered. Someone altered them after they left my hands. Wallace looked at Tom with the expression of a man watching a bridge give way under him. "That's a serious accusation," Wallace said. "It is," Tom said. "And I'm making it. In front of you. In front of Mr. Marsh. In front of the bank manager who is about to make a decision about a man's land and livelihood based partly on records I'm telling you are false." The room was very quiet. Wallace looked at Marsh, at William, back at Tom. The calculation behind his eyes was visible, working fast. "The credit review," Wallace said carefully, "can be postponed pending clarification of." "The credit review," Marsh said, "is hereby suspended pending the outcome of a formal fraud investigation. I have the county clerk's authorization in writing." He placed the document on the desk. "If the bank proceeds with any adverse action against Carter Ridge Ranch before that investigation concludes, the bank itself becomes a party to the fraud complaint." The bank manager picked up the document. He read it. He set it back down. "The review is suspended," he said. Wallace stood up. He looked at William with the expression of a man filing something away. Not defeat, not yet, but a strategic recalculation. "This isn't finished," Wallace said. "No," William agreed. "It isn't." William rode back to Carter Ridge Ranch that night, arriving late, and when Clara heard the horses in the yard, she came downstairs and met him in the entry hallway. He looked tired in the way of a man who has been running hard all day on controlled fury. He looked, she thought, like a person who had been carrying something heavy and had just been told he might not have to carry it alone. She didn't ask how it went. She could read it in him. "The review is suspended," William said. "Tom Fielding came through," Clara said. "He did." William hung up his coat. "Reed went to Wallace tonight. After he left here, he went straight to Wallace and told him everything, including apparently what you said to him at the door." Clara raised an eyebrow. "He told Wallace you claimed to have independent documentation that would survive without the original contracts," William said. Wallace believed him. That's why he agreed to postpone even before Marsh presented the county authorization. He didn't want to act on tainted evidence. "So my bluff was not entirely a bluff," Clara said. "Was any of it a bluff?" "The part about 3 separate people having copies," Clara said. "At that point, it was only one Marsh's office. I sent Denny with a second copy when Reed left, but I didn't know if Denny had reached Harlan's Creek yet." William looked at her for a long moment. "You told a man who was trying to intimidate you that you had more protection than you actually had." "I told him what would be true by the time it mattered," Clara said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "In medicine, we call it a therapeutic confidence," Clara said. "You tell a patient they're going to be all right before you're certain they will be because their belief in the outcome affects the outcome. I told Samuel Reed what I needed him to believe because his belief in it changed what he did next." She paused. "Did it work?" "It worked," William said. "Then it wasn't a bluff," Clara said. "It was a diagnosis and a treatment." This time she clearly saw it, the thing that moved across William Carter's face when she said something that landed as genuinely unexpectedly true. It was not admiration, though there was admiration in it. It was something deeper. Something that had been looking for something for a long time and had just found it. "Reed is going to cooperate," William said, pulling himself back to the facts. "Marsh thinks he'll approach the county office within 48 hours. He knows his only path out of a criminal fraud charge is to give them Wallace. And Wallace has lawyers. He'll fight." William's voice was even. "But fighting in public is not what Wallace does. He operates in the dark. The moment this is in open court, the moment his methods are being examined in front of a judge, he loses something he can't get back." "His invisibility," Clara said. "Yes," Clara nodded. She thought about Wallace dropping those clinic keys on the floor at her feet like she was something he was done with. She thought about 2 years of careful, honest work dismissed in a town meeting while Wallace sat in the back of the room and smiled. "Good," she said quietly. They stood in the entry hallway for a moment, two people at the end of a long day that had been in its way a kind of battle and had been won not with violence or money, but with the unglamorous instruments of truth, documents, and records, and a woman who counted what was actually there rather than what the ledger claimed. "Clara," William said. She looked at him. "What you did today confronting Reed, turning it around on him, buying us time." He stopped, tried again. "You didn't have to do any of this. This is my ranch, my problem. You walked in here because of a storm and I have—" He paused. "I've pulled you into something that could have real consequences for you. With Reed, with Wallace. People who already want to see you fail." "They already wanted to see me fail," Clara said. "That's not new." "It's not the same thing." "No," Clara said. "This time I have evidence. Last time I only had the truth." She looked at him directly. "The truth is better with evidence." William looked at her with those steady, honest eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was such a simple question, such a direct, uncomplicated question. Not "how are you" as social filler, but a genuine inquiry from a person who wanted a genuine answer. Clara thought about it honestly. Her hands had shaken for about 10 minutes after Reed left. She had stood in the kitchen with Mrs. Delaney and drunk half a cup of coffee and not tasted any of it, running through everything she had said, and everything she hadn't said, and whether any of it would hold. "I'm all right," she said. "I was frightened." "I know. I didn't show it." "I know that too," William said. "I'm learning that those are two separate things with you." Clara looked at him. "Go get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow Marsh comes back and we start the formal process. It's going to be a long week." Clara turned toward the stairs. "William." He looked at her. "When this is over," she said, "and we're on the other side of it, I think I'd like to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because I want to." She paused. "I'm saying it now because I don't want to say it when it might seem like relief talking. I want you to know it's a decision." William Carter stood very still. "I hear you," he said quietly and carefully, like a man handling something he didn't want to break. "Good," Clara said. "Good night." She went up the stairs, and William Carter stood in the entry hall of the house his father had built for a family that was supposed to grow in the quiet of a ranch that 40 men called home, and he put one hand flat against the wall to steady himself. Because something had just shifted in the entire weight of the world, and this time it had shifted toward something instead of away. Samuel Reed walked into the county office in Harlan's Creek at 8 o'clock the following morning and asked to speak with the investigator. Marsh sent word to Carter Ridge by noon. Clara read the message at the kitchen table while William stood at the window with his coffee, and for a moment neither of them said anything because the news required a particular kind of quiet. Not celebration, not relief, but the stillness of people who had been holding something very tightly and were only now beginning to understand they could loosen their grip. "He's cooperating," Clara said. "Marsh says he gave them 2 hours of testimony," William said. "Named Wallace as the architect of the land title scheme. Confirmed the supply account manipulation going back 3 years." He paused. "He says Wallace approached him. That the whole plan originated with Wallace, who identified the ranch as a target and recruited Samuel to execute it from the inside." Of course Wallace was the architect, Clara said. Samuel was useful. Wallace was always the one with the goal. The goal being Carter Ridge Ranch. The goal being everything that Wallace couldn't buy outright, Clara said. Your land, your operation, the position in this territory that your father built and that you held. She set down the message. Men like Wallace don't want what they can purchase. They want what they can take. William turned from the window. The county sheriff is riding to Dust Valley today to serve notice on Wallace. Clara looked up. It's done, she asked. The fraud complaint is formalized. The land title challenges are suspended pending criminal investigation. The bank credit review is permanently withdrawn. William's voice was even, but underneath the evenness was something that had been under enormous pressure for days and was now cautiously releasing. Marsh says the case against Wallace is strong enough that his lawyers will push for a settlement rather than open court. Wallace won't want open court, Clara said. No, he won't. William sat down across from her. He looked tired in the way of someone who had been awake fighting something and could now for the first time contemplate sleep. It's over. Clara looked at the message in her hands. She thought about everything that word meant. The ranch was safe. The men who depended on it were safe. William's land, his father's land, would stay in the hands it was supposed to be in. She thought about Garrett with his difficult cough, and Denny with his healing hand, and Augustine, who had worked this land since William's father's time. She thought about all 40 men in those bunkhouses whose lives had been quietly threatened by a scheme they never knew existed. It's over for the ranch, Clara said. William heard the distinction. What isn't over? Wallace is going to settle, Clara said. Quietly. His lawyers will manage it so that the minimum amount of information becomes public record. Samuel cooperates and receives reduced charges. Wallace pays a fine that amounts to a fraction of what he attempted to steal and walks away with his reputation bruised but intact. She set the message on the table. And the story in Dust Valley, what he did to the clinic, what he did to me, that doesn't get addressed in any of this. No, William said. It doesn't. I'm not asking you to fix that, Clara said quickly. I'm saying it clearly so that we both understand what we're starting from. The ranch is safe. My reputation in Dust Valley is still what Wallace made it. Your reputation in Dust Valley, William said carefully, is about to be considerably complicated by the fact that the man who destroyed it is currently under criminal investigation for fraud. Clara looked at him. People will make connections, William said. Wallace targeted you before he moved on the ranch. The timing is clear. Once the investigation becomes even partially public, people in Dust Valley will start asking questions they should have asked 2 years ago. Or they'll say I fabricated my involvement to make myself look better, Clara said. Some will, others won't. William leaned forward slightly. Tom Fielding will talk. Tom is not a man who stays quiet when his store records have been used against him. He'll tell people what he found, and he'll tell them who found it first. Clara was quiet. You don't have to go back there, William said. I'm not saying you need Dust Valley's approval. I'm saying the truth has a way of moving through a community on its own once it starts. I know, Clara said, and I'm saying that whatever you decide, whether you want to address it directly or let it move on its own, you're not making that decision alone anymore. Clara looked at him across that kitchen table where they had spent the last several days building a case out of ledger pages and nursing records, and the particular kind of determination that comes from two people who have each spent too long being underestimated. I know that too, she said quietly. Marsh arrived at the ranch that afternoon in better spirits than Clara had seen him, which for Marsh meant he permitted himself one almost smile and set his case on the table without the grim efficiency of a man prepared for combat. He walked them through what Samuel's testimony had established, what the county investigation would pursue, and what the practical timeline looked like for the formal resolution of the land title challenges. He spoke to both of them with equal directness, treating Clara's questions with the same professional weight he gave William's, and at the end of it he closed his case and said, "There is one remaining matter." My testimony, Clara said. The county investigator will want a formal statement from you, Marsh confirmed. Your documentation of the supply discrepancies, your encounter with Samuel Reed at the door, and your independent knowledge of territorial supply pricing. It will be part of the evidentiary record. He paused. I want to be clear that this statement will be public record. Your name will be attached to it. I understand. It will be visible to people in Dust Valley, to Wallace's lawyers, to anyone who reviews the case. Mr. Marsh, Clara said, I have been a public woman in this territory for 2 years. My name has been attached to things I didn't do, and things I did do, and things that were done to me. I am not afraid of my name being attached to the truth. Marsh nodded. I'll arrange for the investigator to come here if that's preferable to Harlan's Creek, Clara said. I'll come to Harlan's Creek. I'm done conducting my business in places that are more comfortable for everyone else. Marsh looked at William. William looked at Clara. I'll ride with you, he said. I know, Clara said. Odd. They rode to Harlan's Creek 2 days later, and Clara gave her statement to the county investigator in a plain office above the feed store, with William sitting in the hallway outside, and Marsh at the table beside her. And she spoke for 2 hours, with the same clarity and precision she used when explaining a medical procedure. No embellishment, no emotion deployed for effect. Just the clean sequence of what she had found, what it meant, and how she knew. The investigator, a compact man named Briggs, who had the watchful eyes of someone who spent his professional life separating truth from approximation, asked her at one point, Miss Whitmore, how is it that you identified these discrepancies when Mr. Carter, who owns the ranch and the records, did not? Because I had no reason to trust the records, Clara said. Mr. Carter trusted them because he trusted the person who maintained them. I trusted nothing because I arrived with nothing. Fresh eyes and no goodwill to extend, that's not a virtue, Mr. Briggs. It's just my situation. Briggs wrote something down. And your personal records, he said. The nursing supply logs you maintained independently in Dust Valley. You maintained those because you didn't trust the clinic's official ledger. I maintained them because in 2 years on the frontier, I learned that any record which only exists in one place is a record that can disappear, Clara said. I kept my own because they were mine and no one could adjust them without my knowledge. A somewhat distrustful approach. A practical one, Clara said. Medicine teaches you that the difference between what should be true and what is true can be a life. I prefer to deal in what is. Briggs looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Your documentation is the most organized and clearly presented evidentiary material I have received in 11 years of investigation work. Clara looked at him. Is that a compliment or a concern? It is an observation, Briggs said, with admiration attached. When they came out of the building, William was standing in the hallway exactly where she had left him, and he straightened when she appeared, reading her face before she said a word. Done, she said. How was it? Efficient, Clara said. Briggs is a good investigator. He asked the right questions. They walked out into the street together, and Clara stopped on the boardwalk because the afternoon was clear and cold, and she needed a moment to simply stand in it to feel the particular quality of air on the other side of something finished. How do you feel? William asked. Clara thought about it honestly, the way she always did when he asked her a genuine question. Like I put something down that I've been carrying for 2 years, she said, and I'm not sure yet what my hands are for without it. William stood beside her, not rushing her, not filling the moment with reassurance she didn't need. I know something about that, he said. She looked at him. After Thomas died, he said. I ran the ranch the way I'd run a military campaign. Constant movement. Constant problem. If I stayed busy enough, I didn't have to figure out what my hands were for without him in the world. He paused. It took about 2 years before I realized I was running from the question rather than toward anything. What changed? Clara asked. I got tired, William said simply. You can only outrun yourself for so long before your legs give out. Clara was quiet for a moment. What did you find when you stopped running? An empty house, William said, and the beginning of understanding what I actually wanted it to be. They stood on that boardwalk in the cold afternoon air of Harlan's Creek. Two people who had each been out running something for long enough that stillness felt almost unfamiliar, and yet standing here together, it didn't feel like stopping. It felt like arriving. "We should start back," Clara said. "We should," William agreed. Neither of them moved for another moment. Then they walked to the horses and rode back toward Carter Ridge Ranch in the long light of a March afternoon, and the road that had seemed 50 miles long a week ago felt somehow like the right length for where they were going. The news from Dust Valley reached the ranch 4 days later in the form of a letter addressed to Clara. She recognized the handwriting before she opened it. Margaret Eberhardt, Tom's wife. Clara sat at the kitchen table and read it while William worked in the study, and Mrs. Delaney found reasons to be in other rooms because Mrs. Delaney had developed an accurate understanding of when Clara needed space and when she needed company. The letter was 2 pages written in the cramped, careful hand of a woman who had not written many letters and was choosing every word with deliberate honesty. "Miss Whitmore, Tom told me what happened, all of it. He told me what Mr. Wallace did with the store records and what Mr. Reed built with them and how you were the one who found it. He cried when he told me. Tom has not cried in front of me in 23 years of marriage, so I want you to understand that I am telling you something significant. He also told me that you left Dust Valley believing that no one here thought well of you. I want to tell you that this is not true, even if we behaved in ways that made it seem true. Some of us were afraid. Some of us were confused. Some of us simply did not speak when we should have. What you did for me last autumn, sitting with me through 14 hours when I was certain I would not survive, I have not forgotten. I will never forget. My youngest daughter is learning to walk right now. Every time I watch her take a step, I think of you. Tom says you have found a place at Carter Ridge Ranch. I am glad. You deserve a place where people can see you clearly, with gratitude that I know is insufficient. Margaret Eberhardt. Clara put the letter down on the table. She sat with it for a long time. She had spent 2 years telling herself that she didn't need Dust Valley to apologize, that she had made peace with what happened, that she had filed it under the category of things that were true and unfortunate and could not be changed, and had moved forward accordingly. She had believed herself. She discovered sitting at that kitchen table with Margaret Eberhardt's 2 careful pages in front of her that she had not been entirely right. She had needed this. Not the apology itself, the recognition. The acknowledgement from someone who had been there and had seen and had eventually been honest about what they saw. Her youngest daughter is learning to walk right now. Clara pressed the letter flat with both hands. She was not going to cry in the kitchen. She was not that kind of woman, or rather, she was exactly that kind of woman, which was precisely why she held it. William appeared in the doorway. He read her face in the way he had learned to read it, not the surface which was composed, but the thing underneath. "Good news or hard news?" he asked quietly. "Both," Clara said. "In the same envelope." He came and sat across from her without asking if he should, because they had moved past the point where he asked permission for that kind of thing, and she slid the letter across the table without being asked, because they had moved past the point where she needed to decide whether to share. He read it. He set it back down. "Margaret Eberhardt," he said. "Her daughter nearly died last October," Clara said. "Difficult birth. I sat with her for 14 hours. I remember Tom talking about it." "He cried," Clara said. "When he told her about what happened with the records. Tom Fielding cried." She looked at the letter. "I have known Tom Fielding for 2 years, and I would have said he was not a man who cried." "Everyone cries about something," William said. "I know." Clara was quiet. "I just didn't know I was one of the things Tom cried about." William said nothing. He understood that this moment didn't need words. After a while, Clara picked up the letter, folded it carefully, and put it in her notebook, the one with all the supply records, the one that had helped save a ranch. She put Margaret Eberhardt's letter alongside the evidence of everything that had happened in the last week, because it was evidence too. evidence of a different kind. I want to write back to her, Clara said. Of course, William said. And I want to eventually... She stopped. I want to go back to Dust Valley. Not for Wallace, not for any of it. I want to go back because Margaret's daughter is learning to walk, and I would like to see that. Then we'll go, William said. Clara looked at him. We... You said we, William pointed out. When you said you'd stay, you said you wanted to stay and that it was a decision. That implies a shared space. I said I wanted to stay at the ranch, Clara said carefully. I didn't specify a shared space. No, William agreed. You didn't. He looked at her with those steady, honest eyes. Clara, he said. William, she replied in the same tone. I am going to say something, and I want you to let me finish before you respond, because I have been working up to this for several days, and I don't want to lose the thread in the middle. All right, Clara said. You walked onto this ranch 6 days ago because a storm pushed you here, William said. In 6 days, you reorganized my medical supplies, identified a fraud that 3 years of quarterly reviews missed, confronted my former business partner at my front door alone, provided the evidentiary foundation for a county criminal investigation, gave formal testimony, and received a letter that made Tom Fielding cry. He paused. I have been running this ranch for 9 years. I have employed capable people and worked with intelligent people and respected a great many people. What I have not done is find someone who makes this place feel like it's moving toward something rather than simply maintaining itself. Clara was very still. I'm not asking you to become something you're not, William said. I'm not asking you to stop being the woman who closes doors in the faces of men trying to threaten her and then comes inside and drinks coffee like she was discussing the weather. I'm not asking you to need me. I know you don't need me. I've known that from the first mile of the road out of Dust Valley. Then what are you asking? Clara said. I'm asking if you want this, William said. The ranch, the work, me. His voice was even, but it cost him something. She could see it. Not because you have nowhere else to go, because you want it. You told me 2 nights ago that you wanted to stay because you wanted to, not because you had no other option. I believed you. Now I'm asking if that wanting extends to, if what you want includes... William, Clara said. He stopped. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Yes, she said again, simply without embellishment, in the tone of a woman who means the word completely and doesn't feel the need to surround it with anything else. The kitchen was very quiet. Then William Carter reached across the table and took her hand, not dramatically, not urgently, but with the careful, deliberate certainty of a man picking up something he intends to keep. Clara looked at their hands. She thought about the suitcase by the front door, where it had sat for 6 days after she stopped meaning to leave. She thought about Margaret Eberhardt's daughter learning to walk. She thought about Tom Fielding crying, and Garrett's honest eyes, and Denny's healing hand, and 40 men in bunkhouses who didn't know a woman with a leather suitcase and a medicine bag had just become part of the reason their world held together. She thought about the road out of Dust Valley, cold and empty in the early morning, and the sound of hoofbeats coming from behind, and a voice that said, I don't mean to interfere. And she thought about how she had told herself she would only accept the ride until the next town. I want to expand the medical operation, she said. William looked at her. Here, at the ranch, not just treating the hands as they come in injured. She was thinking out loud now the way she did when a clear picture was forming. A proper medical room, supplies stocked correctly and maintained, regular visits from the families in the settlement, not waiting until there's a crisis, preventive care, children especially. She paused. I've been thinking about it since I restocked your supply kit. 6 days ago, William said. 5 technically. I was still theoretically leaving on day 3. The corner of William's mouth moved. That's not a small undertaking, he said. No. Clara agreed. I'll need equipment, space, probably a budget that would make your accountant nervous. My accountant, William said, is a man named Fletcher who has been with this ranch for 4 years, and who will say, whatever I tell him is the right allocation of funds, is the right allocation of funds. Then tell him it is, Clara said. I will, William said. Good, Clara said. They sat there with their hands on the table between them. Two people who had each spent years perfecting the art of not needing anyone, sitting with the particular grace of people who have finally carefully let themselves change their minds about that. Mrs. Delaney is going to be insufferable, Clara said. She has been insufferable since approximately hour 6 of your arrival, William said. She told me you hadn't had someone in this house who mattered in 4 years. She's not wrong, William said. She said it like she'd been waiting to say it for most of those 4 years. She probably has, William said. Mrs. Delaney is a woman of strong opinions and considerable patience. I like her, Clara said. I know, William said. She likes you too. And then quietly in the ordinary kitchen of a ranch house built for a family that was now at last beginning. Clara Whitmore laughed. Not the polite acknowledgement of something amusing. A real laugh, short and genuine, and surprised out of her, and she put her other hand over her mouth as if she hadn't expected it. William watched her with an expression that was completely unguarded. What? Clara said. Nothing, William said. He stopped. What? She said again softer. I've been listening to that laugh for 6 days in my head, he said, wondering when I was going to get to actually hear it. Clara looked at him for a long moment. William Carter, she said. Clara Whitmore, he replied. Don't make me cry in this kitchen. I wouldn't dream of it, he said. But his hand was still on the table, and her hand was still in his. And outside on Carter Ridge Ranch, the afternoon was moving toward evening, the way it always did, the light going long and golden over the land, the men coming in from the fences and the barns. The smell of supper beginning from Mrs. Delaney's kitchen, and it was in every ordinary way the same as every other evening. Except that it wasn't. Because something that had been absent for a very long time had come back into the house, and this time it intended to stay. The letter from Everett Marsh arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Clara gave her testimony, and it was the kind of letter that changed the weight of a room the moment it was read aloud. William read it standing at the kitchen table, still in his work coat, and Clara watched his face go through 3 distinct things before he set the paper down. Wallace settled, he said. Terms, Clara asked. Full withdrawal of the land title challenges. Repayment of all documented financial losses to the ranch. Marsh calculates it at just over $11,000 over 3 years. William's voice was steady. And a formal written acknowledgement filed with the county court that the fraud was orchestrated through manipulation of Carter Ridge Ranch's business accounts by Samuel Reed, acting in coordination with Wallace's commercial interests. Clara was very still. A written acknowledgement. Public record, William said. Marsh pushed hard for it. He said Wallace's lawyers fought it harder than any other term, more than the money. William looked at her. Because a written acknowledgement means anyone who wants to understand what happened can look it up. Anyone in Dust Valley, Clara said. Anyone in this territory, William said. Clara sat down. She had told herself, and told William, and told herself again, that she did not need Dust Valley's understanding to be at peace with what had happened. She had meant it every time she said it. She had constructed her sense of self on foundations that didn't require anyone else's acknowledgement to hold. And yet, $11,000 and a piece of paper filed in a county courthouse felt in this moment like something she had not known she was still waiting for. It's not an apology, she said. No. William agreed. It's a fact on the record. That's better than an apology. I thought you'd say that, William said. Clara looked at the letter. What happens to Samuel? Reduced charges in exchange for his testimony. He'll pay restitution and serve some time. Marsh says the judge is not sympathetic. William sat down. He won't work in a position of financial trust again. Not in this territory. Good, Clara said. She meant it without heat. Not vindictive, just clear. The way you closed a wound, cleanly with the right tools, and then let it heal. There's one more thing in the letter, William said. He slid it across the table. Clara found the paragraph Marsh had added at the bottom, written in slightly smaller script, as though it had been added after the main business was concluded. I should note that the investigator Mr. Briggs has submitted a separate commendation to the Territorial Governor's office, citing Miss Whitmore's documentation and testimony as central to the successful resolution of this case. He indicated it was the most precisely organized, independent evidentiary contribution he had encountered in his career. I thought she should know. Clara read it twice. She put the letter down. She got up, went to the kitchen window, and stood there for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Clara, William said. Give me a minute, she said. He gave her a minute. She used it to do the internal work she always did when something hit harder than expected, the quiet, private process of absorbing it, placing it correctly, not letting it become more than it was or less than it was. Then she turned around. All right, she said. All right, William asked. It's done, Clara said. It's actually done. And the way she said it, not triumphant, not relieved, but simply certain, like a woman who has finished a long surgery and knows the patient is going to live, was the most complete thing William Carter had ever heard. The idea of the medical room had been gathering shape in Clara's mind for 3 weeks, and the morning after Marsh's letter, she walked William through it with the focused precision she used for everything she had decided to do. Not a corner of an existing room. Not a box of supplies in a pantry. A dedicated space properly equipped with examination capacity, clean storage, and enough room to treat 2 patients simultaneously if necessary. The outbuilding east of the main barn, Clara said. It's structurally sound. I had Augustine check it. The roof is good. The floor needs work, but that's straightforward. With 4 men in a week, we could have it functional. What do you need inside it? William asked. An examination table purpose-built. Shelving for supplies organized by category with a locking cabinet for medications. A stove for sterilization. Good light, that's the most important thing. Whatever windows exist need to be enlarged, and I want 2 oil lamps on adjustable mounts. That's a specific list. I've been building it in my head since I restocked your kitchen pantry kit, Clara said, which was the worst organized medical supply I have ever encountered, including the field kit I worked from during a mining accident 2 winters ago. That bad. Bandaging material stored next to cooking flour, Clara said. Yes, that bad. William looked at her. That look of revision and recognition she had catalogued in the first days, which had not gone away, so much as deepened into something more deliberate. I'll talk to the men today, he said. I also want to talk to the families in the settlement, Clara said. Not just treating injuries as they happen, regular visits. Children especially, there are things I can prevent with early attention that I cannot fix once they become serious. They'll come, William said, once they know you're here. Some will be reluctant, Clara said. People on the frontier have complicated relationships with medicine. It costs money, it involves admitting vulnerability, and they've often been failed by the people who were supposed to provide it. Like Dust Valley failed you, William said. Like Dust Valley failed its people, Clara corrected. I was the symptom of the problem. The problem was that Wallace made medicine a commercial instrument rather than a service. What do you do about reluctance? You show up, Clara said. Consistently. You do good work, and you don't make people feel judged for coming late or for having let something go too long. You make the threshold as low as possible. She paused. And you let word of mouth do the rest. In a community this size, one good outcome told to one neighbor reaches everyone within a week. William nodded slowly. Garrett, he said. Garrett's cough has significantly improved with the treatment I recommended, Clara said. Garrett talks to every man on this ranch every single day. He has told each of them something about what I said to him. I guarantee it. He has, William confirmed. Fletcher asked me last week if you'd look at his knee. Tell Fletcher to come find me, Clara said. I already did, William said. Clara looked at him. Yesterday, he said. I told him to come find you yesterday." "And did he?" "He's been trying to work up the nerve," William said. "He's 62 years old and has never willingly seen a medical professional in his life." "Tell him I'll come find him," Clara said. "It's easier for the first one." Dad. Fletcher's knee was worse than he had let on, which surprised exactly no one except Fletcher, who had apparently developed a detailed personal philosophy centered on the idea that pain was a private matter, and if you ignored it long enough, it would eventually get the message. Clara spent 40 minutes with him in the barn, which was where Fletcher had been standing when she found him, because he was 62 and stubborn and had clearly been hoping she'd change her mind about coming. She examined the knee with careful hands and asked questions in the tone she used when she needed honest answers and knew the patient would be tempted to minimize. "How long has the swelling been this bad?" she asked. "Comes and goes," Fletcher said. "How long has it been coming and going?" "Couple years." "Fletcher." He looked at her. "I am not going to tell William if that's what you're worried about," Clara said. "Your health is your business. I am telling you what I see, and you decide what to do with it. That's the arrangement." Fletcher's expression shifted slightly. "Nobody ever said that to me before?" "Said what?" "That it was my business." He paused. "Doc Horton in Harlan's Creek always made you feel like you were being sent to the principal's office." "Dr. Horton," Clara said, "told Garrett his cough was dust. So I would take Dr. Horton's approach to patient dignity with a degree of skepticism." She finished her examination and sat back. "Your knee has sustained cumulative damage from years of hard physical work. There's significant inflammation in the joint. I can reduce the inflammation with proper treatment and give you something to manage the pain more effectively. What I cannot do is reverse the underlying wear." "So it'll get worse," Fletcher said. "Over years, yes. How fast depends significantly on how you manage it now." "And if I manage it, you ride for another 10 years, Clara said. "Possibly more. If you don't, you're looking at a different timeline." Fletcher was quiet. "I'd like to keep riding," he said in the tone of a man making a concession that cost him something. "Then let me help you do that," Clara said. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man who had decided something. By the time Clara left the barn, Fletcher was holding a small paper of instructions she'd written out in plain language, and he was reading it with the concentrated attention of a man who intended to follow directions, even though following directions went against his fundamental character. Garrett was waiting just outside the barn door because of course he was. "Well," Garrett said. "Go away, Garrett," Clara said pleasantly. "He all right?" "He will be if he does what I told him." "He'll do it," Garrett said with certainty. "Fletcher does what women tell him. He just needs to be convinced it was his own idea." He paused. "How's he going to be convinced it was his own idea?" "I told him his knee was his business and his decision," Clara said. "That's generally sufficient." Garrett looked at her. "You know people," he said. "I've been paying attention to them for 31 years. Clara said. "You start to notice patterns." Blood. The medical room was finished in 8 days. Not the projected week, because on day 4, Augustin recruited 3 additional men from the North Fence Line crew who had apparently decided on their own that this was a project worth finishing fast. Clara spent the afternoon of the 8th day organizing it, and when she was done, she stood in the center of it and looked at the shelves and the examination table and the 2 oil lamps on their adjustable mounts, and the window that let in the afternoon light at exactly the angle she had asked for, and she felt something she had not felt in 2 years. Ready. Not just capable ready. The specific combination of preparation and place and purpose that made a person feel like they were exactly where they were supposed to be doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. William appeared in the doorway. He looked at the room. At the organized shelves, at the examination table, at Clara standing in the center of it with her hands at her sides and her chin slightly lifted and an expression he had never seen on her face before. "You look like yourself," he said. Clara turned to look at him. "What does that mean?" "I've been watching you for 3 weeks," William said. "You always look capable. You always look focused. You look like someone who knows what she's doing and intends to do it." He paused. "Right now you look like yourself, like the doing and the person are the same thing." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "That's the most accurate thing anyone has ever said to me," she said quietly. "I pay attention too," William said. "I just didn't have 31 years of practice when I started." "How long have you had?" "3 weeks," he said. Clara looked back at the room. "The first family from the settlement is coming Thursday," she said. "Margaret sent word. She's bringing the baby. Margaret Eberhardt. She wants me to do a proper examination, first one since the birth." Clara's voice was even, but underneath it was something warm and certain. She said in her letter that she's been waiting until there was a proper place for it. "She knew you were building this," William said. "Tom told her. Tom tells Margaret everything, apparently including things Tom finds out from ranch hands who find out from Garrett." Clara shook her head slightly. "Garrett has the most efficient information network in this territory." "Garrett has nothing but time and opinions," William said. "It's a powerful combination. Tell me something," Clara said. She was still looking at the room, at the shelves, at the organized, careful evidence of what this place was becoming. "When your father built the main house, the 8 bedrooms, the dining table that seats 12, did he know he was building something too large? Or did he build for what he believed would be—" William was quiet for a moment. "He built for what he intended," he said. "He believed that what you build space for you eventually grow into." "He was right," Clara said. She turned from the room and walked to the door, and William moved aside to let her through, and as she passed him in the doorway, she stopped. They were very close. The doorway was not wide. "William," she said. "Clara," he said. "Your father built well," she said. And she walked back to the main house, and behind her, she heard William stay in the doorway of the medical room for a long moment before he followed. The first Sunday after the medical room opened, 9 people came from the settlement. Clara had not advertised. She had sent word through Margaret, who had told 2 neighbors, who had apparently told everyone. 9 people arrived over the course of the morning. 3 families, 2 elderly men who had been managing ongoing conditions with willpower and prayer, and a young woman named Lily, who was 17 and pregnant with her first child, and so frightened she stood outside the door for 10 minutes before Clara opened it and said simply, "Come in, it's warmer in here." Lily came in. Clara spent an hour with her. She answered every question Lily had, and several she didn't know she had, and by the time Lily left, she was still frightened. First pregnancies deserved some fear in Clara's professional opinion, but she was informed and she had a plan, and she knew where to come when it mattered. Garrett's wife showed up mid-morning with a covered dish, and the air of a woman who had decided her presence was obviously appropriate, and she and Mrs. Delaney set up a table outside with coffee and food, and by noon, the area around the medical room had the quality of a gathering not planned, just assembled the way community assembles around a thing it recognizes as good. William stood with Augustine at the fence line a respectful distance away and watched. "She did this in Dust Valley," Augustine said. "Tom Eberhardt told me. She did this same thing. People came because word got out that she was good and she was honest with them." "And then Wallace dismantled it," William said. "Yes," Augustine said. "But you cannot dismantle something like this. You can close a building. You cannot close the fact that she sat with people when they were frightened and told them the truth." He paused. "People remember that. They carry it." William watched Clara move from family to family, natural, unhurried, treating each person with the full weight of her attention, as though they were the only person there. He thought about the road out of Dust Valley. The woman with the leather suitcase who had told him she could walk. She could. She absolutely could. That had never been the question. The question had always been whether she would choose not to. 3 months passed, and Carter Ridge Ranch became something it had not been before. Not different in its bones, the land was the same, the work was the same, the rhythm of cattle and seasons, and the particular demands of a large frontier operation continued exactly as it had. But the texture of it had changed. The way a room changes when the right light comes through a window that was always there but never opened. The medical room saw patients 3 days a week. Word had spread beyond the settlement. Families from 2 other communities in the territory had begun making the ride to Carter Ridge, which meant Clara was now managing a patient population of just over 40 families, which meant she needed more supplies, which meant William had a standing order with 2 different suppliers in Harlan's Creek and had negotiated a price that made Fletcher, the unofficial financial conscience of the ranch, say with surprised respect, "That's a good deal." "I watched Clara negotiate her supply orders for 2 hours," William told him. "I learned something." Lily came back when her time came in the 5th month, and she came to Clara rather than the woman in the settlement who had been doing births for 20 years, and Clara considered that the most significant professional endorsement she had received. The birth was straightforward, which Lily did not believe while it was happening, but was grateful for afterward. Clara sat with her for 7 hours, talking her through it with the same calm directness she used for everything. And when it was over, and Lily was holding her son, and crying in the particular way of a woman who has just done something she was not certain she could do, Clara sat with her in the quiet and let the moment be what it was. Denny looked in at the door. At one point he had taken it upon himself to be generally available during the birth for reasons he did not articulate, and Clara sent him for warm water and clean cloth, and he went so fast he nearly tripped over his own boots. "He's going to be useful someday," Clara told Lily. "He's sweet," Lily said, looking at her son. "He is," Clara agreed. "They sometimes are." Well, William asked her to marry him on a Wednesday. Not a special Wednesday. A Wednesday in June, when the work was ordinary, and the day was long, and they were both tired, in the good way of people who had done real things. He asked her at the kitchen table after supper, while Mrs. Delaney was pointedly doing something in another part of the house, and the light was going, and the ranch was settling into evening. He did not make a production of it. He said, "I'd like to marry you, if that's what you want." Clara looked at him across the table. "Is that a question or a statement?" she asked. "It's a question," he said. "Poorly phrased." "It was fine," Clara said. "Well," Clara looked at her hands on the table, at the small scar on her right index finger from a surgical instrument that had slipped during her first year of practice, at the capable, experienced, certain hands of a woman who had spent years learning to trust them when nothing else was trustworthy. "Yes," she said. "That's what I want." William nodded once. Then he reached into his coat pocket and put a ring on the table between them. A simple gold band with a single small stone, not ostentatious, not trying to be more than it was. "It was my mother's," he said. "I don't have to, if you'd prefer something else." "William," Clara said. He stopped. She picked up the ring. She looked at it. "Tell me about her," Clara said. William looked at her. Of all the responses he had prepared for this, was not one of them. "My mother," he said. "You never talk about her," Clara said. "Your father built the house. Thomas was your brother. But your mother—" "She died when I was 12, William said. "I'm sorry." "She was—" He stopped, started again. "She was a practical woman. She didn't have patience for performance. She said what she thought, and what she thought was usually right, and she didn't apologize for either." Clara looked at the ring. "She sounds familiar," she said. "I noticed the resemblance," William said quietly, "approximately 3 days after you arrived." Clara slid the ring onto her finger. It fit. She looked at it for a moment. "She would have liked you," William said. "I would have liked her," Clara said. She looked up at him. "You understand this changes very little about how I operate," she said. "The medical room, the patients, my records, my decisions about treatment, those are mine." "I know," William said. "I will not be managed." "I know that too," William said. "I stopped trying to manage you approximately 20 minutes after I met you." "Good." "Clara." "What?" "Can we stop negotiating the terms for 1 minute?" William said. Clara looked at him. And then, the same surprised laugh, short and genuine, that had come out of her the night in the kitchen when she hadn't expected it. "1 minute," she said. William stood up from the table, came around to her side, and held out his hand. Clara stood up and took it. And that was all. No speech, no grand gesture. Two people standing in the kitchen of a house built for a family that had finally, in its own unconventional way, become one. From the hallway, unmistakably, they heard Mrs. Delaney make a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and was entirely characteristic of a woman who had been waiting for this for a very long time. "She's been in that hallway for 10 minutes, William said quietly. "I know," Clara said. "I heard her. You didn't say anything." "It was her moment too," Clara said. They were married in August on a Saturday in the yard of Carter Ridge Ranch. No church. Clara had made that clear. Not because she was opposed to churches, but because this was not a church kind of thing. This was a ranch, and the people who mattered were here, and the place that mattered was here, and the ceremony should be where they actually lived rather than in a building that would see them twice a year. Marsh came because Marsh had become, through the course of the preceding months, something closer to a friend than either man would have been comfortable articulating directly. He stood with the other witnesses and had the expression of a man attempting to appear professionally detached and failing quietly. Tom and Margaret Eberhardt came from Dust Valley. Tom had driven them the entire distance with his Sunday coat and a resolute expression, and upon arriving had shaken William's hand and then looked at Clara for a long moment and said, "I should have spoken up." "You came today," Clara said. "That's not the same thing." "No," Clara agreed. "But it's something." Tom nodded. He seemed to have expected her to let him off the hook more easily, and the fact that she hadn't seemed to settle something in him rather than wound it. Margaret held her son, who was 4 months old and interested in everything, and stood next to Clara before the ceremony and said, "You look beautiful." "I look like myself," Clara said. "That's what I said," Margaret replied. Garrett stood with the ranch hands in a row that was not military, but had that quality. The quality of men who had decided this mattered and were conducting themselves accordingly. Denny stood straight and tried to look older than 19 and almost succeeded. Augustine stood at the end of the row, with the particular stillness of a man who had seen many things and recognized this as one of the good ones, and Fletcher, who had ridden out that morning on a knee that was by his own admission about 40% better than it had been in 2 years, stood next to Garrett and said nothing, and looked at the front of the group with the expression of a man who was not going to cry and was working very hard at it. The ceremony itself was short. The man who performed it was a circuit judge who owed Marsh a favor and had, Clara suspected, been briefed on the approximate patience level of the bride. He was efficient. When it was over and William held Clara's hand under the wide Montana sky, with the mountains going blue in the distance, and 40 men and their families, and 2 people who had driven from Dust Valley all looking at them, he leaned close and said quietly against her hair, "You remember the first thing I said to you?" Clara turned to look at him. "You don't walk alone anymore," she said. "I meant it then," William said. "I mean it more now." Clara looked at him, at this man who had stopped on a cold road for a woman with a suitcase, and the word "no" still fresh on her lips, who had shown her an empty house and not apologized for its emptiness, who had trusted her with ledgers and fraud and the kind of honest conversation that most people spend entire lifetimes avoiding. "I know you did," she said. "Both times." She looked out at the ranch, at the people gathered in the yard, at Lily in the back of the group holding her 4-month-old son against her shoulder, at Garrett, who was definitely not crying, at Mrs. Delaney, who was not even trying to pretend, at the medical room visible from here, its door standing open in the August heat, at the main house behind them, with its 8 bedrooms and its dining table that seated 12, and its kitchen, where 2 people had stayed up until midnight, building a case out of truth and paperwork, and the stubborn refusal to let a lie stand unchallenged. She thought about the road out of Dust Valley, the old leather suitcase, The 52 miles of open country that had seemed on that cold March morning like the beginning of nothing. She thought about fear as information, about the difference between standing still and arriving, about the particular grace of choosing something not because you have no other option, but because you want it fully clearly, with your eyes open and your hands steady. The woman who had walked away from Dust Valley with everything she owned in one suitcase now stood on 4,000 acres, surrounded by people who had chosen her as clearly as she had chosen them. She had not found a place that accepted her. She had built one. She had walked in the door of this life on a stormy night with mud on her boots and a medicine bag over her shoulder, and a determination that she would not beg anyone for a single thing she had not earned. And she had earned this: every ledger page, every testimony, every patient, every honest conversation across a kitchen table at midnight, every choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. She had earned all of it, and it was hers. Clara Whitmore. Clara Carter looked at her husband and at her ranch and at the life she had made with her own capable hands, and she understood something she had been working her way toward for 31 years. Home was not the place that opened its arms to you. Home was the place you had the courage to claim. She had claimed this one, and she was never walking away from it again.